Okay, so to give a little bit of context, uh, Dumpling was specifically asking because we were talking with the Ohm community a little bit, and they were interested in potentially creating a G-Ohm bean pool and then proposing a BIP to add that pool or the LP tokens for that pool to the silo, which is pretty cool. And Dumpling, who's a self confessed Omi, was saying, well, so how would it work for me as someone who has beans in the silo and has Geom and would want to potentially add liquidity to this whitelisted token or LP token, this liquidity pool, without burning my stock? And so, one thing that might not be made clear, and we apologize that the UX doesn't currently do a good enough job of making this super clear that you can do this, but for the Bean ETH pool, you can effectively uh, add. There's two ways to convert. One is the BIP7 convert, which everyone should, is probably more likely to be familiar with, where when the price is too high, you can convert deposited beans to deposited LP tokens without forfeiting any stock. So you're in practice selling beans and lowering the price. So anytime the price is too high, you can convert your beans into LP tokens, gain more seeds, start accruing more stock without burning any of your stock for making that conversion. And then vice versa, or similarly, maybe is a better way to say it, when the price is too low, you can convert your deposited LP tokens into deposited beans without, obviously, you have to burn the extra steeds, but you don't have to burn basically any stock. The change in stock is actually there's a slight change based on the change in the value of the LP token since you did it, but the idea is you don't lose any of the grown stock or the stock from seeds that you've received for your time in the silo. And so in practice, what that allows you to do is to potentially buy beans in effect when the price is too low by converting your LP tokens to deposited beans without any loss of stock. So that's BIP7 convert. Now, the other convert that Dumpling was asking about was currently, if you have Ethereum that's circulating in your wallet, and then you have deposited beans, you can actually convert your deposited beans into deposited LP tokens by adding additional ETH. So it's not a convert where you're selling, it's a convert such that you're adding the equivalent amount of Ethereum to match your beans based on the current ratio of beans to Ethereum in the pool, and there's no loss of stock associated with that convert either. And that was the convert that was there originally, but it seems to have been gotten lost in the fray a little bit. And so wanted to just highlight that when the generalized bean farm is complete, such that you'll be able to seamlessly interoperate with various assets and protocols across DeFi, you'll be able to effectively convert your other assets into LP to match your deposited beans. And when we talk about product market fit, everyone that has lots of deposited beans in the silo, those beans are going to be really attractive to other protocols to try to get those beans into liquidity pools, providing liquidity to their assets. And so Ohm may be hopefully the first of many different protocols that are going to be interested in attracting the beans that are in the silo to providing liquidity for their tokens. And the two different converts are designed to make that as simple and clean as possible from a UX perspective. Obviously, we could do a better job of displaying it and making it clear. But that's the good thing is there's a whole UX team now that's working on revamping the whole user experience and interacting with the protocol to hopefully make everything much more clear. And that will obviously go a long way. And then I just saw a comment come in about the Bean Gauge from Bean Profit, and that's totally right. One of the main goals of moving to a gauge system for stock rewards is specifically to minimize the amount of friction necessary to have different pools added to this stock system, such that you don't necessarily need a whole BIP. The goal is to make it a little bit simpler for different protocols to propose adding various tokens, LP tokens, and other assets to the silo. So just wanted to make a note on that because that's a particularly prescient comment there from Bean Profit.
Good stuff. First of all, want to shout out to the Ohmies. I feel like we have over the last week or so, the Ohm community has started to take a lot of notice. We've been having some really great discussions with folks from that community in the Discord. So excited to have them, interacting with our group, interacting with the protocol. Super exciting. Publius, is there anything you want to talk more about when it comes to the generalized silo at this moment? I know that everybody's still in a planning mode. Is there anything else you want to cover since you just kind of touched on it quickly?
Well, to expand a little bit, and there hasn't been too much of an update on the development side, other than development is happening as fast as possible. Over the past week, it's taken a little bit of a backseat to working closely with Omnitia to finalize things, so that hopefully in the next week or so, maybe a week is hopefully a decent guess. We can get a public report from Omnitia, which would then facilitate the gauge proposal going forward on Curve, and because that was kind of the main holdup on the Curve gauge proposal. There was a comment on the proposal basically saying, well, don't you think you should wait till there's at least a few public audits? And I think one is reasonable. And so the idea is we've been really focusing on getting that uh, ready to go as quickly as possible. So once that's done, then we'll hopefully be able to turn our attention to finalizing the next stages of the generalized silo, which goes hand in hand with the curve gauge proposal, obviously, because currently there aren't really any opportunities to add interest from other protocols or yield from other protocols for Beanstalk related assets, but the addition of the Bean3 Curve LP tokens to the gauge would be the first instance really of interest from another protocol, potentially, assuming that some gauge was allocated to the pool. And that is when it makes sense uh, to move forward with the next silo generalization BIP, which will facilitate the distribution of rewards from other yield from other protocols to silo members based on their specific deposits. And so that, there's the reason to prioritize the Omnitia audit is because until the Omnitia audit goes live, we don't really want to move ahead with the curve gauge proposal, and therefore there's no real reason to push ahead with the silo generalization. So people were asking, when's generalized minting coming? When's the next stages of generalized convert? And the next stages of the generalized silo. Those are all hopefully going to happen in the next month or so. But the past week and the next week are really focused on just getting the audit ready and the code ready for the release of the public audit, which is very exciting. So that's a little bit of an update on the silo, but obviously then gave a slightly related update to the Omnitia audit, which is maybe why the current silo BIP hasn't been released just yet or proposed.
That's great information. Frankly, I don't know if I'm as excited about the Omnitia audit, but I am excited about it because it'll be an excellent tool as we kind of navigate this process of showing the amount of underlying work and, let's say, safety and security of the protocol itself. And I know that we're getting into a lot of discussions on Twitter and other platforms, about whether or not there's some type of issue lingering, or everyone's always asking the question, with this kind of percentage yields for things like pods, like, is this a rug? And so to be able to turn around and say, well, you can look at our audit and you can look at the open source of the code, you tell me, that makes me really excited. I feel like that's going to be a really powerful tool, both with other groups we're looking to partner with and with the public in general.
Yeah, and transparency is the name of the game. And so
Yep.
getting, while we've had the content from Omniscia for a couple weeks and have been starting to make the changes necessary that they've requested, and in our opinion, none of them have been uh, too serious such that it's like, cause for a pause or any real scare. Nonetheless, in the spirit of transparency, it'll be a huge deal to get a public report out there. And, uh, you know, given that Beanstalk has been alive for a little over 7 months, there is reason to feel good about its resilience out in the wild. But nonetheless, getting that, public stamp of approval from a reputable audit firm is a big step in the right direction and does mean things in the context of other integrations across DeFi.
Completely agreed. All right. So we've got a ton of really good questions in the class discussion. We will do our best to get to them all. I'm going to start. So Austin dropped some stuff in a little earlier on this afternoon. I think so. We talked about generalized minting. Or no, we didn't talk about generalized minting. We talked about the generalized silo. You want to talk about generalized minting quick?
Sure. So the generalized minting is one of the upgrades to Beanstalk. It's not exactly an upgrade to the silo in the sense that not every asset that's whitelisted to be in the silo has to be included in the minting, and vice versa. Not necessarily every minting pool has to have an LP token that's whitelisted for the silo. So it's not technically a part of the silo upgrades, but it is part of the upgrade to generalizing Beanstalk. And when you think about how Beanstalk currently works from a peg maintenance perspective, the only pool that determines the minting of beans and the minting of soil is the Bean ETH Uniswap pool, and specifically as it compares to the USDC ETH Uniswap pool. Now, there's a lot of liquidity and volume now uh, in the Bean 3 curve pool, and given that 3 curve functions as a decentralized uh, way, is in a similar way that Beanstalk can determine the price of a dollar by comparing the Bean ETH Uniswap pool to the USDC ETH Uniswap pool. Beanstalk can use the 3 pool and the virtual price of the 3 pool to infer the value of 3 curve relative to a dollar, and therefore can infer the value of beans relative to a dollar. And by using similar logic, can effectively start to mint beans, not based just on the Bean ETH Uniswap pool, but on other pools. And so the generalization to the minting will start with the Bean 3 curve pool, but uh, will be potentially expandable to other assets as well, or other pools as well. Now, it's important to note that Convert, which we were just talking about before, is currently only supported for uh, the Bean ETH Uniswap pool. And while BIP7 Convert has had a really meaningful impact on peg maintenance, we think it doesn't, especially because of that, it would be a bad idea to have generalized minting in a pool where a pool is supported for minting, where you don't also have conversions in that pool. And so the idea is to have generalized minting and generalized conversions happen in the same BIP. And that's also hopefully going to happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks or so.
Right. Thanks for that. Okay. Next question from Austin. So, how's progress coming along for adding CRV liquidity data to the subgraph?
So the short answer is not sure if ETH Wallet is here, um, but ETH Wallet,
Let's
maybe
call it.
if ETH Wallet's here or Thunder Broker's here, maybe they want to hop up and chat a little bit about how the SDK development is going. But in short, Beanstalk Farms has a whole middleware team that's working on upgrading and basically developing an open source SDK to support really easy development for other people to start to integrate and build on top of Beanstalk. Now, that SDK is going to involve both an upgrade to the subgraph and also a wide variety of non-subgraph related stuff, because ultimately, let's say the decentralized graph network is down, the SDK ultimately needs to be able to process things even without the subgraph. And so a lot of that development is happening in tandem. So the other thing to note is when you upgrade a subgraph, it's pretty expensive and it's kind of a pain in the butt, because all of the indexers have to re-index the entire history of the protocol, basically. And so we're a little bit hesitant to just constantly push upgrades to the subgraph. But the short answer is development to the subgraph is happening, and development to an overall middleware suite is also happening. And you'll start to see a lot of those results hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would say.
And yeah, just to touch on that a little bit more, we've been working with ETH Wallet to get, kind of a minimal upgradable product for the Bean subgraph, specifically to fix issues like you're saying, where, the price and liquidity is not being accounted for. And, really hoping to get that up as soon as possible. And, the majority of the code is in place.
All right. Good stuff. Next, I'll read through this relatively quickly. So Austin's last question, his group, it's somewhat around BIP9. So reading the question section, basically someone asked, let's see. So based on the information of BIP9, so Beanstalk being willing to issue Beanstalk's willing to issue debt every season to mint soil every season without increasing the number of unharvestable pods during periods of excess demand for soil. Beanstalk will issue at most the same number of pods for each season as became harvestable at the start of the season, so BIP9. Does this mean if demand for soil stays high, the pod line will not decrease in size? Of course, that would mean the pods would be harvesting at the front, but the pod rate is an important metric to see decreasing as bean supply increases.
Yeah, so specifically and just to summarize, because I think for newcomers it would have been really hard to follow you there, Rex. BIP9 made some changes to the amount of available soil, particularly in the instances where there was excess demand for soil every season. So Beanstalk, in order to properly adjust the weather, looks at the price, the debt level, and the change in demand for soil over the previous 2 seasons. In order to look at the change in demand for soil, Beanstalk needs to offer some amount of soil every season. And accordingly, the question is, well, how much soil should be offered? Back in November, when Beanstalk went through its last growth cycle prior to the past couple weeks, there was way too much soil available, even when there was the price was above 1, and there was no reason for Beanstalk to attract credit other than just to measure demand for soil. Beanstalk was still issuing like 30,000 soil a season or something, because it was a percentage of the total bean supply. Now, BIP9 made a really substantive change such that when you have seasons where the price is really high and there's excess demand for soil, in practice, what happens is as follows. Let's say at the start of the season, 10,000 pods harvest. Over the next season, the most the most pods Beanstalk is willing to issue based on the current weather is 10,000 pods. So over the course of the season, the total number of pods should basically remain fixed. Now, what that means is the total pod line, the length of the pod line, will stay the same length while the pod line starts to churn and the bean supply starts to grow. Now, as the bean supply starts to grow and the amount of debt stays constant, the debt level of the system comes down. And so we would argue, excuse me about that, we would argue that the debt level, the pod rate, is one of the main indicators of the health of a credit-based system. And the current soil parameters make it such that the pod line can churn while it remains the same length, while the pod line starts to decrease. And if you look at over the past couple of days, the pod line has basically remained flat, or more or less flat, while the pod rate has started to come down really significantly. And so that's an indicator that the new soil parameters as structured by BIP9 are having a really meaningful effect on Beanstalk's health during this growth cycle.
All right. So, next question, and it's a small group of them from Series 13. I'll do my best to do them justice without just reading them really fast. So Series says, good evening, few questions. Could you please outline how the composability aspect of the protocol will look in the future once other whitelisted tokens are allowed into the silo? More specifically, 1A, if we have whitelisted tokens such as GOM that itself pays out rewards on a regular basis, how are those rewards and beans calculated?
So the amount of stock, this is the way basically rewards work in a generalized way. The amount of stock that you receive for depositing, let's say, a GOM Bean LP token is based on the Bean denominated value of the LP token at the time you deposit the LP token. Now, even if the GOM increases or decreases in value, the amount of stock you have earned on top of that asset is effectively earned at the time you deposit it. Now, in short, you start to receive grown stock from the seeds for that deposited asset. So the amount of stock you have grows continuously. Now, on top of that, let's say the bean price is above one over different periods of time while you have that asset deposited in the silo and owned stock, you will earn bean seniorage. Those beans are immediately deposited in the silo. The rewards in beans are calculated based on your stock ownership as it compares to the total stock ownership. So let's say you have 0.1% of the bean supply. If the bean supply increases 10,000 beans, you're entitled to 10 beans. Those beans are immediately deposited in the silo and earn 10 stock. And so your beans start to earn compounding interest. That's basically how it works. Does that make sense? And to answer 1B, the beans from 1A that you just got paid, they're withdrawable without any penalty. There's no tax on withdrawing your beans, other than just like any other withdrawal, you have to forfeit the stock and seeds associated with that deposit. But in terms of the beans itself, any beans that you earn are yours to keep, and you can withdraw them or convert them or do whatever you want with them. But once you get paid bean seniorage, that's yours.
And in regards to rewards that are allocated from other protocols, e.g., you deposit a Bean3 Curve LP token that receives curve and convex rewards. Those rewards are distributed based on your collective ownership of the Bean3 Curve LP tokens in the silo. So the goal is to mimic the rewards in the same way that it would be as if they were not in the silo.
Good addition there. So, Sirius's next question is, if the experiment fails and Beanstalk's no longer a going concern due to lack of uptake or some other reason aside from smart contract failure, are our non-bean or non-stock assets in the silo returnable?
Well, it depends what failure looks like, but in short, failure in the case of a depegging, whether that's from the protocol having a vulnerability or it being the smart contract having a vulnerability, in practice, that looks like the bean price collapsing. And if the bean price collapses to near zero, that means that any liquidity pools in which it trade against effectively have no assets in them other than beans. And so in that instance, you'd probably own a ton of beans and they'd probably be worthless because you wouldn't be able to trade them for anything. So when you say your non-bean assets will be unrecoverable, in practice, it's a truism, right? The experiment failing is the same thing as all of the assets that bean trade against effectively being drained, whether that's from a run on the bank where there's so much supply and sell pressure that the bean price starts to collapse, which again is defined by an absence of liquidity with against which bean trades. So it's a little bit of a truism, but yes, it's very important to acknowledge that if the experiment failed, you would all of the assets that that are non-bean, they would not be in the silo or be trading against beans. So in practice, your beans would likely be worthless.
Yes, it almost seems like the assets in the silo, the non-bean assets, would no longer exist in the silo because part of that process, that run on the bank process, would be removing those assets. Correct? Individuals that had them would remove them for the sake of protecting their interest.
That's not quite true. It's just more so we don't imagine that any assets that don't directly support Beanstalk's peg maintenance would not be whitelisted by the Beanstalk DAO to be deposited into the silo, and thus the majority of tokens will likely be liquidity tokens containing Bean. Liquidity tokens specifically are valued based on the underlying assets beneath them. If the Bean price were to crash in a liquidity pool that you had liquidity in, the ownership of your pool will mostly contain Bean instead of the other asset that it's paired with. E.g., in the Bean ETH pool, if the price of Bean crashes, your LP will consist of mostly Bean and not very much ETH. In the case where we, as the Beanstalk DAO, decided to whitelist a token that was not a Bean LP token or the Bean, then that asset would still maintain its value. Say in the future, we allow you to deposit Curve tokens into the silo to accumulate gauge vote. If the price of Bean crashed, that Curve would still exist, and you would have the deposit slip to then later withdraw that Curve. So your assets in the silo are not going anywhere.
I really appreciate that additional explanation. That is exactly hinting at what was going through my mind. I think it is probably a good thing for individuals that are in the audience to know is that, that if there is a non-bean associated asset, that it would maintain its value and be withdrawable, but those assets that are directly associated with bean would lose their value due to that.
Yeah, and that's a great clarification, Publius. And if anything, the key thing to note, which you did, is that the liquidity pool tokens are likely to be the ones that are added to the whitelist by stockholders. And while there may be exceptions like Curve tokens, it's likely that the vast majority of assets that are added to the silo, certainly in the next couple of months, are going to be liquidity pool tokens. And therefore, that was where we were coming at it from, that it coincides with an overall depegging event. But Publius was totally right that in general, if it's a non-beanstalk related asset where there's no exposure to the bean price, with the exception of the protocol getting hacked in some way or the silo being exploited, that would not be the case. So you'd still retain and be able to withdraw any of those non-bean exposed assets.
Perfect. All right. So Sirius's next question, and this is something that's come up before in discussions in A&Ts, question about insurance providers. And basically Sirius is asking if we have an official or an unofficial position on insurance providers in the DeFi space.
Yeah, so definitely. The short answer is, with what Beanstalk is trying to accomplish, insurance in a counterintuitive way actually hurts the protocol. In the same way that if Beanstalk had a treasury, the idea is, well, if there's some sort of thing backing the protocol, ultimately then the credit isn't the main thing offering security or providing the thing that people have faith in. And given that the goal is to provide as much faith as possible in the credit of the protocol, if anything, we think that the credit should be highlighted, and hiding behind like a treasury or something like the Luna Foundation Guard or an insurance fund, ultimately in a counterintuitive way would probably hurt Beanstalk. And so the protocol shouldn't have any sort of native treasury or native insurance. While individuals may want to go seek out insurance for their specific bean exposure, that's fine. But particularly when you think about the scale that Beanstalk is hoping to achieve, frankly, it wouldn't really be possible to insure the protocol as it reaches billions and hundreds of billions and ultimately, hopefully, trillions of beans. That's really hard to insure in any real meaningful sense. So the goal is, instead of hiding behind something that seems like it might work, to really just highlight the credit of the protocol.
Appreciate that. And that kind of hits on the fourth question Sirius had as well, about a particular insurance strategy. So lots of comments. Comment from Austin about dumpling getting swole, to which I replied with the dumpling emoji because it's hilarious. Looking down the list, so Bean Profit, he asked a little bit more about, for a little bit more, let's say a little bit more clarity around Bean Gauge. And what he wrote is, does that mean that other protocols will pay Bean holders to provide liquidity for their tokens? And compared to like the curve functionality.
The short answer is the Beanstalk Gauge will be a system through which Silo members, stockholders, can vote on whether to allow for assets to be deposited in the silo and the amount of stock and seeds to reward those assets per bean denominated value. The short answer is we don't have any finite plans on how the gauge system should work, or any opinions on how it should work at the moment, like anything strong worth sharing. We're still thinking about how it should work, because one thing to note is that currently stock is accumulated linearly, and that has a really meaningful effect on the overall decentralization of ownership of stock. And so we want to make sure that the gauge system enforces similar distributions of stock over time, and still thinking through the best way to make that happen. But in the coming months, the idea would be to move the system through which assets are added to the silo whitelist to a slightly more flexible system than requiring a full BIP per se. If hopefully that clarifies things.
Okay. So next, question from Canadian Ben, and admittedly one of my favorite questions. Really enjoyed seeing this. Is, we all know the Beanstalk's an experiment. Will Beanstalk ever not be an experiment? And if so, when would we know?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer, in a Schrodinger's cat sense. Like, you can call it not an experiment, but that's not sure that's actually something you want to do, or if calling it not an experiment actually changes the state of Beanstalk as an experiment. Ultimately, there's nothing to say that. I mean, when you think about the history of money, no money has really lasted as the dominant money for more than 100 years. So, from that standard, money in general is an experiment, and Beanstalk is an iteration on money. So, don't think we can ever really weasel our way out of being an experiment.
Part of the reason I like the question, because I feel like it's one of those big philosophical insights and discussions. All right, so quick apologies to, and I apologize if I mispronounced her name, Aliceros. Accidentally missed your question. I was just running through the list a little bit too quick. Okay, so Aliceros' question is, given it will likely be some time before ownership of Beanstalk is ready to be transferred to the null address, what are your thoughts on adding additional people to the ownership multisig in the interim to increase decentralization?
Don't have a strong opinion one way or another. If that was something that I felt strongly about, would basically be totally supportive of that. Currently, it's a 3-signature wallet held on, different hardware wallets in different places. But if the community wanted to expand that to more signatories, more signatures, that would be perfectly appropriate in our eyes. Not opposed, and appreciate that question. And frankly, we don't view our responsibility as Publius as anything other than ensuring that the protocol is safe from anything malicious. And we've only had to use ownership privileges once in the case of the pause. And we'll likely do it again to implement the changes from the Omniscia BIP to make them once. And then from that point, I think there might actually be a conversation where we would probably say there's a conversation worth having on whether it's time to transfer ownership of Beanstalk to the null address, or whether to wait for another audit. The Trail of Bits audit is going to happen in the next couple months. So that's another interesting question worth happening, but certainly not opposed to it. And, would just be curious on what the community would like us to do, basically.
All right, thanks for that. And I will say this to the audience: if there's ever anything I miss, do not hesitate to DM me while we're talking. Aliceris did it. Say, hey, looks like you missed my question. Please don't hesitate to do that. I am the most human of all humans, and I will miss things and accidentally not see stuff, or I'll read things wrong. Please don't hesitate to shoot me a message and be like, hey, yo, what's going on here? So never hesitate. Okay. So let's see if I can find my place down here. All right. Okay. So Asfi, I think, put a B in front of his name for this to be in our Bean Discord. So Asfi, I'll try. Again, sorry if I murdered your name. So ask a basic question: when I buy pods from ETH, does that mean, or does that ETH buy Bean from the ETH Bean liquidity pool and then burn those beans?
That's exactly what happens. Exactly. And when we think about the goal of soil, it's specifically removing beans from the Bean ETH pool. And so that's exactly what Beanstalk wants to happen. And that's exactly what happens in practice.
I feel like this is, one of the continued ongoing discussions. One of the things that we will probably just never be past is the question of, like, is this a Ponzi scheme? And whenever I am having a discussion with someone about that, a lot of times it's on Twitter, I feel like my answers come back to this: the idea that when Beanstalk is taking on credit, it is not using that value to pay off old debt. It is using it to take beans out of circulation. So it's a different process than what would be considered a Ponzi scheme, because it's using that value to reduce supply and thereby increase value. So this is such an important point. It's something that I think we will probably be repeating for hopefully years to come. But yeah, great question. Really appreciate that. And it looks like there's actually a ton of really good discussion below that in the class discussion. I'm going to try to go through here and see where the next question is. Again, if I miss somebody's, the next one I'm seeing is Ours question. And if I miss something in between, please don't hesitate to DM me. So Our asks, can you randomize the time within seasons when soil is available?
The short answer is anything's possible, but this would be suboptimal because the goal is to have as efficient demand for soil, a market for soil as possible, and you don't want to make it unclear to people when the soil will be available. You want people to show up and be ready to buy it. And furthermore, to actually issue the soil would require like a sunrise function call or something similar to change the state of Beanstalk. The goal is to minimize the amount of cost to maintain Beanstalk. So would probably, there's no real reason to do that, but you could do it too.
All right. Mod's got a question, and Mod, you got to help me with the acronym. So POL. I'll read through the question. And
Protocol own liquidity.
Thank you. Okay, so Mod's question is, Mod asks for thoughts on continuing to sell soil when available soil is 0 in a currency other than Bean. Protocol own liquidity, not to maintain PEG, but to measure demand for soil and avoid inorganic demand for Bean.
So the short answer is you could do that, but given that you're issuing debt, you'd rather have that debt turn into demand for beans so that ultimately that debt is paid off. And you would assume that even if there's excess demand for soil and the price is above 1, due to converts and the natural arbitrageurs playing the bean price, you should still have bean peg crosses. And so in short, anytime you're issuing debt, you really probably do want to attract demand for beans, although it's a very interesting thought and would have to give it a little bit more consideration before, really having an opinion. But my first instinct would be that that's not optimal.
Right. Okay. King Arthur asks, do you see Bean as the dominant or a dominant stablecoin? They ask because as time develops, we could easily see governments like the US developing their own stablecoins supported by the Federal Reserve. And while that's far from the narrative of decentralization, it might provide some more safety for institutions seeking an asset pegged to USD.
Well, from that perspective, if you consider something like JP Morgan coin, where they claim to be using a blockchain to handle some of the internal accounting on their end, and you say, well, that's a stable coin, well, then, it's hard to say one way or another. And particularly if you consider the situation where the government is issuing some sort of Fed coin, in that case, there's likely to be a lot of Fed coins, trillions of Fed coins. But with that said, when you think about DeFi and the growth of decentralized open source technology, don't really think that FedCoin has a place in there, frankly. And when we talk about being as the dominant stablecoin, which we would say that's the goal, talking about that more in the context of decentralized finance. And while one day DeFi may be significantly larger than the current financial world, and hopefully Beanstalk is a driving force towards that happening, ultimately, if there's a Fed coin, there's going to be trillions of Fed coins. So, then it's just a question of, well, what do you mean by dominant? And, what's the point in getting into semantics?
Yeah, I'd also be interested to see how the public would and will continue to view coins issued by government entities. I know that so China's working on their cryptocurrency program, and certainly based on the executive order that was just recently issued here in the U.S. Sounds like there's a lot of discussion here and a lot of thought, at least at this point. Didn't see a lot of action out of that executive order, but certainly a lot of report requests and a lot of consideration. And it'd be interesting to see how the public will react to the potential of a government-issued coin in terms of control and privacy. And I feel like that's a really strong argument.
Just dropped a fun argument, a fun article in the class discussion for people if they're in the mood for a fun read.
Yeah, it's so. Yes, that is. I would say that that's probably the article you just dropped. Probably talks a lot about the thoughts that I've been having in this exact space. So,
and this writer's pretty good. I enjoyed their style. It was fun.
Nice. All right, I'll have to read that. Okay. Oh man, Barty the Soil Sniper asking how long till Bean becomes the standard global currency.
Internally, we're constantly texting each other when Beanstalk. So it's
Right.
kind of a meme. Like there's lots of work to get done, and at some point it's all going to get done, and it's all going to happen. So when isn't really the point. It's more about enjoying the process, and once it happens, it's just going to be something we're all nostalgic about. So for now, enjoying the uncertainty, enjoying the opportunity to build, enjoying the community that's forming, and enjoying the roller coasters. So how long, who can say? But hopefully one day soon.
Right. It's funny. I guess it was in the Twitter army, the open chat the other night I was we were talking about something, and I dropped in, just this idea that someday, probably not long from now, the protocol will be minting, 50 or 100,000 coins per season. We'll be connected to 4 or 5 different liquidity pools, and we'll be talking about this period, and we'll be referring to it as like back in the day.
There's a great Kanye lyric. You can still be who you wish you is. It ain't happened yet, and that's where the tuition is.
Right.
But then I think it also could be it ain't happened yet, and that's what intuition is. And either way, it's a world-class lyric, and maybe it's meant to be ambiguous. So, whatever. Just enjoying the process.
Could have that put in, like, have that cross-stitched and put it over top of the desk, Publius, in your office.
Fun stuff. Fun
Indeed.
stuff.
All right, so let's see. I'm seeing what Sync dropped in. So I think so Sync was replying to Barty the Soil Sniper. Sync's all about, man, he's like the resident philosopher. When I think of Sync, we talked about it before, him like sitting with a pipe, just thinking big thoughts. IPO and chill, always down for good stuff too. Question and after. Okay. Okay, yeah, that is a good question. So IPO and chill wants to know who has the best Discord username that uses Bean. So the best Bean pun. Well, that could be a competition. We could do PF Drake. Write that down.
It's not a competition, guys. It's Beantoven. It's very clearly Beantoven. That's just that name is it's as good as it gets.
So strong.
So, strong. If people want to throw their hat in the ring, they're gonna have to do some serious thinking there, because that's pretty good stuff.
King of the Hill. That's great. Austin had a reply for the Ponzi scheme, which I always appreciate. Sync's got more good feedback. Man, okay. Looks like the next question is, by the way, I will say this again. I love the fact that there's really lively discussion, even in the class discussion channel. I don't mind having to kind of read through what's going on. I love to see the discussion here. I'd love to see it in the general chat. Okay. Looks like our next question is Canadian Bennett, and he's asking, does Publius have any new thoughts on the Beanstalk DEX? Last time I talked about this, I know they were still playing with the idea. Just wondering if they have any new thoughts.
Nothing too substantive, frankly, on this end. I don't know, Publius, you have any thoughts? Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll hop in, but that has not been something we've given too much brain power to. I mean, some of the things that we're looking at are, you have to look at and just to state for everyone, what's the point of the Beanstalk DEX? If you haven't taken a look at the roadmap, well, ultimately, the main thing that is difficult for decentralized exchanges to do is attract liquidity. The beauty of Beanstalk is it naturally attracts liquidity. Now, currently, all of the DEXs that Beans trade on are other protocols, and there's fees being paid to those governance token holders or liquidity providers that are not in Beanstalk. And so the idea is that because Beanstalk has its own native ability to attract liquidity, Beanstalk could hopefully one day support its own Beanstalk native decentralized exchange with basically zero trading fee, where liquidity is simply attracted because of stock. Now, it's really important to note that in order to preserve the decentralization of Beanstalk and Bean, any minting pools would have to remain on other protocols, because if you had like the well, not necessarily, but most likely, uh, it would make a lot of sense to keep a lot of the minting pools on other protocols. So there's never going to be a lack of reliance or interdependency on other decentralized exchanges. But the main benefit of a Beanstalk DEX would be that Beanstalk could attract liquidity and retain it without having transaction fees. And obviously, a race to zero on the DEX market would be one if someone could actually provide zero fees, zero trading fees. And that's something that Beanstalk could, in theory, provide. So don't have too many thoughts on the specific structure of that necessarily. Thinking about, I mean, there's a lot of different DEXs out there. Bancor's doing some really cool stuff, and we're starting to study how their structure works. But don't have too many thoughts on how the Beanstalk DEX will work, and that's that's a project for a little bit into the future.
That's pretty exciting. I'm excited about what that will look like down the road. All right. Look at you guys are awesome. Look at this class discussion thread. If no one is in the class discussion, this is sweet. Stolen hamburger. Calling Publius out as a Kanye stan. I'm going to say that as well for myself. I've been around since college dropout, and when I saw this stolen hamburger, all I could think of was changing the lyrics to Gold Digger to Bean Farmer. I'm sure that Beethoven can work it out. It'll probably come out on the second LP.
We're getting ourselves into some trouble here, folks.
Kanye is looking for a decentralized financial protocol to partner with. Our DMs are open. All right, looks like more and more good stuff. Don't spill the beans from PF Drake. Don't spill the beans is pretty darn good. Okay, so Mr. Manifold. All right, so this is also about the DEX, but I'll throw it out and we'll see if it adds any to the discussion. So Mr. Manifold asks, does the Beanstalk DEX mean that you'll be able to trade from stablecoin Bean to ETH and back tax free, such that not trading in the Beanstalk DEX is inefficient, possibly to the tune of 50%?
All right, so this is not tax advice, folks, in any way. However, BIP2 introduced a potential tax efficiency in the form of going from, if you have pods that are harvestable and you intend to deposit them in the silo, instead of harvesting your pods, turning them into beans, taking delivery on those beans, which is probably a taxable event because you're receiving assets into your wallet that weren't there before. Now Beanstalk can just deposit those assets in the silo on your behalf, and you never need to take delivery. Now, the generalized bean farm, not even the Beanstalk DEX, which is a little bit down the road, but the generalized bean farm, which is 4 to 6 weeks away, let's call it, that will facilitate wrapping tokens into Beanstalk. So let's say you have beans and you trade them into Ethereum, you will be able to elect whether to take delivery on that Ethereum or whether to leave that Ethereum wrapped within Beanstalk. And so you'd, in theory, be able to go from beans into Ethereum, not take delivery in the future, trade that back into beans, never take delivery. So the idea is with the generalized bean farm, you'll never need to take delivery. Now, we have no opinion whatsoever on whether that has tax implications or not, but various community members have reached out to us and said, that would be beneficial to them. So want to enable that for people that, for whatever reason, they think that would be beneficial from a tax perspective. But again, we have no opinion whatsoever on that.
Appreciate that. And Mr. Manifold just said it in the bottom of the chat. Not financial advice. Do your own research. We're literally just legumes.
We're just chatting here, folks. This is
Just
a place
chatting.
for everyone to learn and
Correct.
ask questions, but ultimately there's no right answers. And as we were talking about before, this is all an experiment. So
Yep. Completely agree.
this is fun for us all to come to some things together. Austin, that's that's again not do your own research, folks. Fun stuff.
Always
Fun
do
stuff.
your own research. So Nasdaq said it in the chat, and I will say it in front of the crew here. Obviously we've been going through the class discussion thread, but traditionally, and here as well, if someone wants to come up and ask a question, we are more than happy to do that. Raise your hand. We're at 8:30, or I should say we're at 1 hour. We're at 8:30 Eastern time. But if anybody has any kind of last items they want to bring up as questions or thoughts before we cut everyone loose, we would definitely want to entertain that.
Whoever just bought and sold 420,000 beans, nice.
Holy crap!
It was a buy and sell. It was an ARB, but still hilarious.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Fun stuff.
Good
2
stuff.
transactions, actually.
Utility. Moving. All right. So one last quick thing is I think some people know, some people don't. PF Drake is our new events lead in the community team. One of the things we wanted to do just for fun is we're going to do some giveaways for folks that happen to be in the crowd tonight. Going to try to hook you up with some Beanstalk swag. So PF was searching through just looking through who is in attendance tonight, and I think he's going to drop a couple names into the classroom discussion, and we will reach out to you to try to figure out a way to get that to you. And of course, if for personal information reasons you don't want to do that, certainly fine. Just want to make that available to say, hey, thanks for coming, and we'll continue to do that every week for class. Just I think we're going to kind of look at like who's asking really good questions, and then who's new, and try to maybe get one individual from each of those crowds. So always come and bring your good questions, bring your friends. You never know when you might end up with a Beanstalk hat or t-shirt too, in addition to all the really good discussion that you got over the last hour. All right, looks like we are just about done. So with that, we'll start to cut people loose. Publius, any other thoughts before we let you go?
Just want to say the past week has definitely been exciting to see all this excess demand for soil and see the effects of BIP 6 and BIP 7 and BIP 9 in practice, and very enthused by the growth of the community, and want to encourage everyone to continue to ask questions and raise concerns. And just one of the things that's made Beanstalk so great so far is the community and everyone's willingness to kind of ask questions and work together to figure things out. And just want to say that as we grow, want to do our best to preserve that environment. So I think our community is very committed to that, but want to encourage all the newcomers here to really just ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them collectively in a way that's truthful and as transparent as humanly possible. So welcome to all the newcomers, and very excited for the continued growth of Beanstalk in our community.
Completely agree. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for your time. And we will see you next week, if not before. Thanks again, everybody. Talk to you later.